December 8, 1941. Somewhere in the Pacific. Aboard the flagship Nagato, the reports are arriving. Men crowd around, reading the damage assessments aloud. 8 battleships hit, 180 aircraft destroyed, more than 2,000 Americans dead. Tokyo is celebrating. In the wardroom, officers embrace. Glasses are raised. For Japan, this is the dawn they have been building toward for years. One man is not celebrating. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sits alone, the architect of the attack. The man who designed every approach vector, every wave, every target. He is not among his staff. He is not raising a glass. He is, by every account that survives him, sunk in apparent depression. The question is not complicated, but the answer is everything. Why? What did Yamamoto know that the room full of celebration did not? The answer begins not with the attack, but with the man. And it begins not in the Pacific, but in America. Isoroku Yamamoto is born on April 4, 1884, in Nagaoka, a provincial city in the mountains of Niigata Prefecture. He is adopted into the Yamamoto family at 17, an old samurai name for a young man with a sharply mathematical mind and a constitution suited for the sea. By 21, he is already at war. At the Battle of Tsushima Straits in May 1905, the Imperial Japanese Navy annihilates the Russian Baltic Fleet in what is arguably the most lopsided naval victory in modern history. Yamamoto fights in it. He comes home missing 2 fingers on his left hand and, by all accounts, seems unbothered. Proof of presence. He rises through the ranks with the methodical efficiency of a man who never stops working. And then, in 1919, Japan sends him somewhere that will change everything, America. He arrives in Boston as a special student at Harvard University. He's 35 years old, and he studies economics, English, and petroleum. He reads omnivorously, sleeps 3 hours a night, and on his summers, he doesn't stay in the classroom. He hitchhikes. He tours the oil fields of Texas and Mexico. He walks through automobile plants. He stands inside the thing Japan is considering going to war against, and he reads it the way a man who has studied poker reads a table. He becomes a passionate poker player in America. He stays up all night at the table, winning hand after hand. He develops what his biographers describe as contempt for his American opponents across the veldt. But he never confuses the players with the machine behind them. The oil fields, the steel mills, the factories running around the clock. He understands, with the cold clarity of an economist, what these things mean in a war of industrial consumption. He returns to Japan and serves as naval attaché in Washington, adding years of direct observation to what he had already learned in the oil fields and the factories. By the time he leaves, he possesses an understanding of American industrial capacity that no other senior Japanese commander will ever match. He is the most qualified man in Japan to answer the question, can we beat them? His answer is unambiguous. He gives it to school children during a visit in 1940. Japan cannot beat America. Therefore, Japan should not fight America. He says the same thing, in different registers, to anyone who will listen. He opposes the invasion of Manchuria. He opposes the war in China. When the army marches in 1937, he tells a friend, "The stupid army has started again." He opposes the tripartite pact with Nazi Germany and fascist Italy with particular vehemence, warning that binding Japan to Hitler's enemies will lock Japan into a war with the 2 most powerful naval powers on Earth. He is overruled on every count. Japan's response to its most perceptive strategist is not to promote him, not to listen to him, but to send him death threats. Nationalist assassins mark him as a traitor. The hate mail arrives in streams. On August 30th, 1939, 2 days before Hitler invades Poland, the government solves the problem by appointing Yamamoto commander-in-chief of the combined fleet and sending him to sea, where he is harder to kill. Japan's response to the man most qualified to assess its chances is not to reconsider. It is to move him somewhere. His arguments cannot reach the people making the decisions. What Japan does next cannot be separated from the trap it has already built for itself. Japan in 1941 is a nation running hot. Military spending has consumed 28% of national income by 1937. The army is bogged down in China, bleeding resources into a war that produces no decisive victory, and Japan produces almost no oil. The engine of its empire runs on American imports. When Japan moves south into Indochina in 1941, Roosevelt responds with a crushing economic embargo. The calculus becomes brutal and clear. Every month Japan waits, it grows weaker relative to America. Its oil reserves drain. Its military capacity diminishes. The window of any possible advantage narrows with each passing week. This is not delusional reasoning. It is cold arithmetic that leads to a terrible conclusion. Act now, or accept slow strangulation. The militarist faction in Tokyo chooses to act. They build a strategy around a set of assumptions that feel, in their own internal logic, almost reasonable. Japan will strike the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The blow will be so devastating that America's ability to project power in the Pacific will be paralyzed for months. Long enough for Japan to seize the oil and rubber resources of Southeast Asia, establish a defensive perimeter stretching across thousands of miles of ocean, and present the United States with a fait accompli that will be too costly to reverse. Americans, Japan reasons, are soft, politically divided, geographically insulated, fundamentally isolationist. They will calculate the price of taking back the Pacific and decide it isn't worth paying. They will come to the table. They will start selling oil again. This is the plan. It is not irrational, given the premises, but the premises are completely wrong, and Yamamoto knows it. He says so directly to Prime Minister Konoye in 1940. If I'm told to fight, then I can guarantee to put up a tough fight for the first 6 months, but I have absolutely no confidence as to what would happen if it went on for 2 or 3 years. He repeats the warning in September 1941, weeks before the attack. For a while, we'll have everything our own way, stretching out in every direction like an octopus spreading its tentacles. But it'll last for 1.5 years at the most. The plan moves forward anyway. The date is set. The carrier force departs at Horafu Island on November 26th. 6 aircraft carriers sailing east in radio silence through fog and heavy seas. Yamamoto, who has designed the only version of the attack that gives Japan any chance at all, does his job. It is a quiet and beautiful Sunday morning in Hawaii. Many of the 60,000 sailors and military personnel stationed at Pearl Harbor are still in their bunks. Some are eating breakfast. A few are on duty. The water in the harbor is calm. At 8 minutes before 8 o'clock, the first wave arrives. 183 Japanese aircraft cross the mountains north of Pearl Harbor. Dive bombers and torpedo planes split into coordinated attack corridors. Battleship Row, 8 capital ships moored in a line along the southeast bank of Ford Island, takes the brunt of the first wave. Bombs strike fuel and ammunition stores. Torpedoes run beneath the calm water and detonate against steel hulls. Then the USS Arizona's forward magazine detonates. The explosion is visible from miles away. 1,177 men are gone in an instant. The Arizona settles to the bottom of the harbor in less than 9 minutes. A second wave follows. Then it's over. The total accounting: 8 battleships hit, 4 sunk or settled in the mud. 180 American aircraft destroyed, mostly on the ground. 2,403 Americans dead. The lead aviator of the first wave is a pilot named Mitsuo Fuchida. His post-war accounts of the attack would become some of the most cited in the historical record, and some of the most disputed. The dramatic scenes attributed to him, particularly his accounts of what he argued at the command table, have not held up to scrutiny. Historians have found that before the importance of certain targets became widely understood, Fuchida's accounts made no mention of them at all. The structural failure of the attack is not in dispute. The interpersonal drama Fuchida constructed around it largely is. In Tokyo, the celebrations begin immediately. The damage assessment reads like a victory roll. 8 battleships damaged or sunk. The Pacific Fleet, to all appearances, gutted in a single morning. Back aboard the Nagato, somewhere in the Pacific, the staff is celebrating. Yamamoto is not. He is alone, sitting in apparent depression, upset, specifically about the Foreign Ministry's catastrophic bungling. The declaration of war was delivered to the American government after the bombs were already falling, not before. After. Japan's carefully planned military operation had become, in a single administrative failure, an unprovoked surprise attack on a nation it had never formally declared war against. Yamamoto understood precisely what that meant. He had lived in America. He understood the psychology. Roosevelt would stand before Congress and name this. The American people would hear him. And the thing Japan had specifically needed them to do, calculate the cost, lose their nerve, look for an exit, was now the last thing they would ever do. The attack looks, from the outside, like a triumph. The man who planned it looks like a man attending a funeral. Japan destroyed the wrong things. It is a failure visible in real time to anyone who understood what a modern naval war would require. And it occurs in 3 distinct ways, each one more consequential than the last. The first, the carriers. On the morning of December the 7th, 1941, the USS Enterprise is at sea, delivering aircraft to Wake Island. The USS Lexington is ferrying planes to Midway. The USS Saratoga is on the west coast. All 3 are undamaged. All 3 survive. This is not a minor footnote. Yamamoto himself had spent his career arguing, against considerable institutional resistance, that aircraft carriers were the decisive weapons of modern naval warfare. He had championed naval aviation when battleships were still the measure of sea power. He understood, better than almost anyone in either navy, that the next Pacific War would be won and lost in the air, from the sea. The attack plan he designed prioritized the battleships at anchor on Battleship Row. The weapons that would determine the outcome of the Pacific War were already gone before the first torpedo hit the water. When the attack force turns north and sails home, the 3 carriers Japan needed to destroy are still at sea, intact, waiting. 6 months later, they will be at Midway. The second, the oil. Pearl Harbor's fuel storage is not hidden. It is not underground. It is not protected by anything more sophisticated than distance from Battleship Row. 4.5 million barrels sit in large above-ground tanks on the hills above the harbor. Essentially the entire Pacific Fleet's operational reserve. Visible from the air, impossible to miss. Some historians have argued that Japan could have met its strategic objectives by concentrating exclusively on those tanks, even without sinking a single ship. Without fuel, the Pacific Fleet cannot operate. Without the ability to operate from Pearl Harbor, American counterattack operations would have been delayed by weeks, possibly far longer. The tanks are not touched, not one. Nagumo's task force turns north and goes home, and the oil tanks stand in the morning light, gleaming and intact, already being drawn upon to fuel whatever comes next. Why? The answer is a strategic assumption buried inside the entire Japanese plan. Japan believed the war would be short. Short enough that fuel infrastructure wouldn't matter. The decisive blow would land, America would negotiate, and the conflict would end before oil reserves and repair capacity became relevant factors. The third, the repair yards. Of the 21 American ships damaged or lost at Pearl Harbor, all but 3 are repaired and returned to service. The dry docks, the machine shops, the welding facilities, the submarine base, all of it is untouched. The morning after the attack, American workers are already in the yards, working on damaged hulls before the smoke clears. The ships Japan sinks come back. At the Battle of Surigao Strait in October 1944, 5 of those same battleships, the ones that settled into the mud of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, participate in the last battleship-on-battleship engagement in naval history. They are positioned in a line across the strait. The Japanese fleet that enters is destroyed. 2 Japanese battleships are among the losses. The weapons Japan chose to destroy in December 1941 killed Japanese sailors in October 1944. The question of why Japan didn't order a third wave circles around the figure of Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, who commanded the strike force and made the Sanchasu call to turn north. His reasoning was not entirely without merit. He didn't know where the American carriers were. His crews had been at sea for nearly 2 weeks. A third wave would return in darkness, and no one in either navy had reliable night carrier landing procedures. The fog of war is real, and Nagumo was operating inside it. But Yamamoto arrived at a clear verdict. He stated categorically that it had been a great mistake not to order a third strike. The man who designed the attack concluded that the decision to turn north, without hitting the oil, without destroying the yards, without hunting the carriers, was the moment a tactical success became a strategic failure. The most famous thing Yamamoto is supposed to have said about Pearl Harbor is almost certainly something he never said at all. I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve. The line appears at the end of the 1970 film, "Tora, Tora, Tora." The director later claimed it had been found in Yamamoto's diary. No diary entry has ever been produced. No primary source has ever been identified. Japanese and American historians have searched the records. The quote does not appear. What Yamamoto actually wrote is both more measured and more devastating. In January 1942, while Tokyo was still celebrating, he replied to a journalist named Ogata Takatora. A military man can scarcely pride himself on having smitten a sleeping enemy. It is more a matter of shame, simply, for the one smitten. I would rather you made your appraisal after seeing what the enemy does, since it is certain that, angered and outraged, he will soon launch a determined counterattack. He wrote this 6 months before Midway. The Hollywood version is a good line. The real one is better because it is specific and because it was right. Japan's strategic gamble rested on a reading of American political psychology that was accurate in one dimension and catastrophically wrong in another. America was divided. America was isolationist. America was deeply reluctant to commit to another war. All of that was real. What Japan mistook for weakness was idle capacity. In 1939, 10 million Americans are unemployed. American industry is running at a fraction of its potential output. The factories are there, the workers are there, the steel and the coal and the oil are there. What isn't there yet is the reason to use them. Japan provided that reason on a Sunday morning in December. President Roosevelt stands before Congress and names December 7th a date which will live in infamy. He is not making a speech. He is issuing a production order. Within weeks, he sets targets for his nation's factories. 60,000 aircraft in 1942, 125,000 in 1943. Over the course of the war, American industry delivers 297,000 aircraft, 193,000 artillery pieces, 86,000 tanks, 2 million trucks. Industrial production, already the world's largest, doubles in size. The comparison in carriers alone tells the story of the Pacific War in miniature. In the 3 years following the Battle of Midway, Japan builds 6 aircraft carriers. The United States builds 17. When Winston Churchill hears the news of Pearl Harbor, he goes to bed. He writes later, by his own account, that he slept the sleep of the saved. He knew that with America in the war, the outcome was no longer in doubt. Britain's Prime Minister and Japan's Admiral are, in this moment, perfect mirrors of each other. Two men of equal clarity, reading the same event from opposite sides of it, arriving at the same conclusion. The architect of the attack sits alone in depression. The leader of Britain's battered democracy sleeps soundly for the first time in years. This is what Yamamoto had written in a letter after the attack. It's like having one's hand bitten rather badly by a dog one was feeding. He already knew. He wrote it down. The victories come, exactly as Yamamoto predicted. Japan's forces sweep across the Pacific in the first months of 1942 with a speed and violence that stuns the Allied command. Malaya falls, Singapore falls, Burma falls, the Dutch East Indies fall, Wake Island, Guam, the Philippines. Yamamoto's octopus spreads its tentacles in every direction, and for a brief season it seems, to an observer without the arithmetic, that Japan is winning. Yamamoto knows the clock is running. He said it to Konoye in 1940. He repeated it in September 1941. He is not surprised by the victories. He is watching the calendar. In June 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy sends its carrier force toward Midway Atoll. It is intended as a strategic trap. What Yamamoto does not know is that American code breakers have been reading Japanese naval communications for weeks. The trap is expected. The American carriers are already there. The vessels Japan failed to destroy at Pearl Harbor, waiting in the blue water northwest of the atoll. In 2 days of battle, Japan loses 4 fleet carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, the same class of ship that launched against Pearl Harbor 6 months before. Gone. The clock runs out almost to the day. This is not pattern, it is mathematical precision. Yamamoto had said a year and a half at the most. He had said utterly no confidence for the 2nd or 3rd year. Midway is 6 months after Pearl Harbor. The tide turns on schedule. What follows is the arithmetic being worked out across island after island, month after month. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan. Every battle consumes Japanese resources that cannot be replaced. Every battle consumes American resources that are replaced with interest. Yamamoto flies into the Solomon Islands on April 18, 1943. He is conducting an inspection tour of forward bases, trying to bolster morale after the grinding defeat at Guadalcanal. The message containing his itinerary, his arrival times, his aircraft type, his precise routing, has been transmitted in Japanese naval codes that American intelligence has been reading for months. 16 Lockheed P-38 Lightnings from the 339th Fighter Squadron are already airborne when Yamamoto's transport crosses the coastline of Bougainville. They have been waiting. They intercept. Yamamoto's aircraft goes down in the jungle. When they find his body, he is still strapped in his seat. His hand is on the hilt of his katana. The man who told Japan not to go to war is killed by the war he opposed. Killed using intelligence decoded from codes Japan trusted, the kind of patient, industrialized intelligence work that represents precisely the American institutional capacity he had spent his career warning about. The system he warned would outlast Japan killed the man who warned about it. He is 59 years old. The morning of December 8, 1941, Pearl Harbor is already at work. The burning ships are the visible story, but walk past Battleship Row and look at the rest. The submarine base, intact. The machine shops, intact. The dry docks, intact. Workers are already in the yards before the fires have gone out, welding steel onto damaged hulls, assessing what can be saved. The answer, it turns out, is almost everything. And on the hills above the harbor, the fuel tank farm. 4.5 million barrels. Above ground. Enormous, cylindrical, unremarkable in the morning light. Nagumo's task force is already over the horizon, sailing north. The tanks stand as they stood the morning before, and the morning before that. They do not know they have been spared. They do not know that the fuel inside them will power the ships that come back, and the ships that come after those, and the counter-offensive that spans 3 years and an ocean. They just stand there. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo survives Pearl Harbor, survives Midway, though barely, his force broken, survives long enough to command the defense of Saipan in 1944. The American assault is overwhelming. The carriers he didn't hunt, the oil he didn't burn, the yards he didn't wreck, all of it has compounded into a military machine of a scale Japan cannot match. He retreats to a cave. He fires a pistol. For his years of service, the Empire promotes him to full admiral after his death. The famous line attributed to Yamamoto, the sleeping giant, the terrible resolve, was never his. It was written for a film in 1970 by men imagining what he should have said. It has the shape of truth. But the truth he actually wrote, in the quiet weeks after the attack, while his staff was still celebrating and Tokyo was still drinking toasts to the burning of Battleship Row, is something starker and harder to hold. A military man can scarcely pride himself on having smitten a sleeping enemy. It is more a matter of shame, simply for the one smitten. I would rather you made your appraisal after seeing what the enemy does, since it is certain that, angered and outraged, he will soon launch a determined counterattack. He wrote those words 6 months before Midway. He wrote them while his staff celebrated. He wrote them sitting alone in a room full of noise, a man with 3 fingers on his left hand, and a better understanding of America than anyone in a position to stop what was coming. The oil tanks stood. The carriers were at sea. The repair yards opened the morning after. The production lines were already humming before the smoke cleared over Battleship Row. Everything Yamamoto knew would happen, happened. Everything he warned against came true, on the schedule he had predicted, in the way he had described, with the consequences he had named. He already knew.